Now I'm very excited to welcome back an amazing college football capper, better, and great friend of the show, and Josh Nunn from the Action Network. You can follow Josh on Twitter at StepOnADuck1. Josh, here we are again, my man. Can't stop. I don't think either of us can stop talking college football, and we got some Big Ten. How's the summer treating you?
Kiev, I'm doing really well. I can't stop, and I haven't stopped talking college football. We've kind of spent a lot of our time in the trenches, not only researching and deep diving these teams with all the publications out and a lot of the two deep rosters getting finalized, but we've made a lot of appearances together talking college football, and it's really a great time of the off season to kind of get our thoughts together, dive into the derivative markets and the futures, and start looking at week one, which is only 7 weeks away.
Only 7 weeks away. Did you hear that? Oh my God, here we are. I cannot wait already. And I'm itching, man. I'm itching. As a matter of fact, I even made a few week 1, week 0 plays, and hopefully we'll get to that. But the premise of this show is the Big Ten, as you know. And before we get to the Big Ten, we did talk like group of 5, me and you. Just any additional wagers pop up since our last conversation, futures or whatever. If you don't, I do have one.
I do. So the game of the year markets came out, and I saw Georgia at under a touchdown when they traveled to Tennessee, and so I took Georgia -6.5 in the game of the year markets. I think that that's just going to be a situation where Tennessee is getting a little too much respect. I see Joey Aguilar at quarterback, and he at times got eaten up by the Sun Belt, and I think that this front seven for the Georgia defense is just one that is just going to wreak havoc in this game and really make it tough for Tennessee. I think we're getting a little too much helmet respect from Tennessee, and this is just kind of one of those flex spots for Georgia where I think they can absolutely lay it on the Volunteers. The only other real one that I've had in recent history here that since the last time we've talked is I did take a Sun Belt under for regular season wins. I took Arkansas State under 5.5. I look at a couple of things with this team this year. This defense has lost so much from what they did last year. They were very fortunate in one-score games, and they had a couple of miracle comebacks in their first couple of weeks of the season against Central Arkansas and Tulsa that should have been losses. Their defense and opportunistic turnovers really kept them in a couple games against some of the upper echelon teams in the Sun Belt. And this year, I just look at the schedule for Arkansas State. They've got to go to Arkansas, and they play the Razorbacks for the first time ever. And then they host Iowa State. And then they've got to go to Kennesaw, and that'll be a real sleepy, tricky spot for Arkansas State. And then most of the conference home games are tougher. So Texas State, Georgia Southern, an improved Southern Miss team, and then Louisiana Lafayette at home. That makes most of the winnables road contests, which are still not easy, at Troy, at App State, at South Alabama. I just think there's too much toughness in the schedule, and I think this team is due for some negative regression. They had a lot of positive regression last year. I don't see a bowl game for Butch Jones this year in Arkansas State under 5.5.
Okay, and I'm with you on that. I totally agree. Lost a ton of people, only one true returning starter on defense. No disagreement here. I don't think they're getting to a bowl. And I'm going to tell you, man, I don't know who it was on our show last time we talked in this group of 5, but after I did my Sun Belt research, I thought there was too much value on Southern Miss at 26-1. And I'm not even saying that James Madison's not going to win it. But here's the thing, at 26-1, you can hope that they can get to the ball game and get to the championship there. And if that happens, you have a very hedgeable ticket, right? I'm not sure if Sunbelt is still going divisions. I think, weren't they the last ones last year that had divisions, Josh?
And they still do.
And they still do. Okay. Well, either way, 26-1 when they're just this is basically Marshall becoming Southern Miss. And it's not just Marshall, it's older Marshall. The kids are now a year older and a year stronger. And as a man, you don't hit your peak in football until 25 to 30 years old. Right. So I think they're just going to be a better version. And since they're all going there, this feels a lot like Kirk Cinetti from going from James Madison to Indiana on how well they did. This just feels like they're going to have a chip on their shoulder too, and just start beating people. And I'll tell you this, they're playing Mississippi State at home, the very first game. And that is a big fat double-digit spread. I'm sniffing around that one, Josh.
I don't hate it by any means. And I think that Southern Miss is one of those teams that is going to get penalized by the helmet sticker. But when you really dive into the personnel and you dive into the transfers and look at who's on that team, you've got quarterback Braylon Braxton, who comes in from Marshall, and he just had an exquisite touchdown to interception ratio last year, was accurate with the ball, made smart decisions. They've got plenty of other transfers to be excited about. This Southern Miss team is going to surprise. And it would not surprise me at all if you look up in the middle of the third quarter of that game where they're hosting Mississippi State and you say, what in the world is going on there? How is Mississippi State struggling with that team? But I think Southern Miss is going to be very, very improved, and you might still find some value in over 4.5 on the regular season wins. This is certainly a bowl team this season.
Yes, I think so too. There's a great number on the regular season wins. And if you're worried about it, just put a little more on the regular season wins, put less on the future. But 26-1 is just too tasty. They do get App State at home, which is nice. The tough ones at Louisiana, as we all know. But man, looking through the schedule, for some reason, I'm not even seeing James Madison here. I don't know why that you would think that they'd be playing them, but maybe you can see where they're supposed to play them, but it's not showing up on this 2025 schedule at all. SC Jacksonville State. Yeah,
just on balance, because they're going to play all the teams in the Western Division and then only 2 from the East. So this year, their Eastern Division foes are going to be Georgia Southern, and they're also going to play. Let's see where the other one is at. App State.
The tough one is, and the tough one's at Louisiana. So they got App State, but they avoided James Madison, so that's good. For some reason, when I made this bet, I thought they had James Madison, but that's even better. Now they can play James Madison in the championship game. So there you go. You can hit it from both sides. So glad I re-looked at that, man. But that's what I was thinking. But we'll try to get into some more after this Big Ten preview, because we have a couple of week 1 plays that we'd like to discuss as well. But starting with the Big Ten, and I start with the highest power rated team that I currently have in the Big Ten, and no surprises, it's Ohio State, who last year finished at 31 points, better than the average team. Huge upgrades, obviously, throughout the college football playoffs. Returning production only ranks 92. But to be honest with you, that's just Ohio State. Come on, man. They're still returning Jeremiah Smith. That's why I care about. The recruiting is second to none. 6th in 2024, 4th in 2023, 4th in 2022. Transfer portals on 3 net ratings, they're 10th. Yards per play, 6.95. Defensive yards per play, 4.19, which is a net 2.76. Rush EPA ranked 10th. Dropback EPA ranked 2nd. Opponent rush EPA ranked 6th on defense and 2nd on opponent dropback EPA. Turnover margin was +3. Here we are. Ryan Day is back, my man. Josh, what are your thoughts on Ohio State, who has a win total of 10.5?
Yeah, and I mean, just a superior team last year and really ran through the playoff and really hit their stride after an embarrassing loss at home against Michigan to end the regular season, but really lit a fire into that team, and they really came out strong with exquisite performances and really non-competitive matchups against Tennessee, Oregon, and then really controlled the fourth quarter against Texas before defeating Notre Dame and winning the national championship. I do think there is some cause for concern with just having to replace some production on defense, and they're really relying on transfers both at the P4 and the Group of 5 level. And so I think there's a chance that maybe this team could somewhat creep down into that maybe 2nd or 3rd position in the Big Ten. There's some case to be made that Penn State might be a bit stronger, but I think Ohio State is primed once again to be a team that is favored in all 12 games. They should be expected to go 10-2 at absolute worst, 11-1 likely. And I think the schedule sets up well, save for a few tricky spots. You know, the schedule is really good because they get to host Penn State, and really the couple tricky road games. One is at Washington, where they're off a bye, and then they're at Illinois after they host Minnesota. Certainly a game they'll be favored by probably 14 to 16 points in. But this is a team that'll be double-digit favorites consistently throughout the season, and certainly looking at, if not a Big Ten championship, another return trip to the playoff.
Absolutely. You got 2 new coordinators there, and Brian Hartline on offense. It was good. Great recruiter. DC Matt Patricia comes in, who's very experienced. Julian Sayen's it's looking like him as the quarterback. Jeremiah Smith's back. Parnell Tate's back. James Peoples at running back. CJ Donaldson transfers in from West Virginia, and Max Clare from Purdue. I didn't even know Purdue had a guy good enough to transfer to Ohio State, my friend. But here we are. Max Clare is the tight end there. 14-2 last year, as you know. And man, yeah, this is my highest power rating team out of any team at 26.5 points above the average team. So it condenses a little bit in the beginning and it stretches out the years, the games, the weeks, as the weeks go by. The biggest losses were Will Howard, Emeka Ibuka, and the two running backs, Travion Henderson, obviously, and Quidshawn Junkins. Losses on CJ Hicks, Jack Sawyer, who I thought could be a sleeper in that NFL draft there, cornerback Denzel Burke, and a few more. I just win, reload, and win again is kind of what I say about Ohio State. And best talent in football. They got over the hump, but I think they're going to be gunning to beat Michigan this year, as you know. And it's interesting how you lose Jim Knowles to Penn State. I think it's weird, but at the same time, it's fine. They got their championship. They can say bye. They don't have to pay the guy. It's time after a championship. It's almost like an exhale type situation, in my opinion. I know Ohio State fans might disagree with that, but Jeremiah Smith is the best player in football, and he's on this team. I have to put them above Penn State. My Penn State, my numbers 10.25 wins is kind of where I'm at. I think there's a hiccup somewhere maybe, but most likely they are favored in all 12 games, and they're going to be the best team in college football. Next team I have to break down is Penn State. And Penn State last year's power rating 23.5 points better than the average team. Returning production ranks, Bill Conley's, by the way, when I go through all these, 25th, 76% on offense, 53% on defense. Great recruiting, 12th, 14th, and 6th from 2024 to 2022. Transfer portal's net ratings, 35. Yards per play, 6.54. Defensive yards per play, 4.67, which I thought was a little bit not so Penn State like, but they still netted 1.87 yards per play. 13th in rush EPA, 14th in dropback EPA, 10th in opponent rush EPA, and 23rd in opponent dropback EPA with a nice fat turnover margin of plus 11. We're looking at a win total again of 10.5. Josh, what do you think about Penn State?
Yeah, strong team. I think everybody this offseason has looked at the glaring loss of Tyler Warren, their explosive tight end, but I think that they did a great job in the portal recruiting some additional players from the P5 level, including Kyron Hudson from USC and Trevor Pena from Syracuse. So I think the skill room is going to be explosive once again. I think people look at Drew Aller and they're still a little bit just kind of lukewarm on him. But I think if he takes a stride this year and improves on the already impressive 3,327 yards and 24-8 touchdown to interception ratio, I think this team will really be just fine. I think the schedule sets up well enough to really accumulate the wins. And there's a couple tricky spots. I mean, really the ones that I see are obviously at Ohio State. They're both off of by November 1st, and that'll be really one of them that gives one of those teams the inside track for the Big Ten championship game. There may be a couple other tricky against the spread spots for Penn State when they go on the road at Iowa. Maybe that trip to UCLA after they host Oregon will be a little bit tricky. It will probably be laying a big number of 16, 17 points or so. So there could be some against the spread spots where you could look at maybe going the other way. But overall, I think this schedule lines up for Penn State to, at bare minimum, rack up 10 wins. And this is one of those teams where I think if you are interested in the derivative markets or the to make the playoff sort of market, the Big Ten had 4 teams last year that made the playoff, and I really cannot drum up a scenario where Penn State does not do enough to impress the voters and get themselves into the 12-team playoff once again. So should be a strong season in Happy Valley. I think Penn State will be just fine. If there really is any pause for concern, they do lose quite a few in the secondary that were key contributors, and so they're going to have to rebuild there with a few transfers. I generally believe that those transfers will probably perform okay. I think Penn State will be a strong team once again.
And, they already have Andy Kotelnicki back on offense coordinator. Now you add Jim Knowles. That's very strong. But it is all about Drew Aller, right? Is he the guy that's going to keep choking in these big situations? And it kind of goes with the coach, too, of James Franklin. You got Katron Allen there and Singleton and those 2 transfers you mentioned. They're loaded, man. But, medium schedule, Oregon, Ohio State and at Iowa, as I wrote, is kind of the key areas there. And I did forget to mention Ohio State against the Longhorns. I think Ohio State wins that game, though. I see my number is 10, but I think that, they could certainly win 11 games. So I'm not messing around with that. With that number, as Ohio State was about 2-1 to win the Big Ten, they're 2.65 to 1 to win the Big Ten. So not a ton of value for me. You can just literally wait until they get to the championship game, and if it's against Ohio State, you're getting plus money in that situation too. They just returned a lot of guys. Abdul Carter is probably their biggest loss, right? Maybe safety Kevin Winston or Phelan Reed, right? So there is a easy path to the playoffs for them. I think it's easy money to bet them even at the minus 250 to make the playoffs. So that's my opinion on Penn State.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the other thing too to think about is this team really has a lot of things to like about their consistency. They were very strong on third down last year. They scored 55 times in the red zone out of 62 attempts. The offensive line did really well, only allowing 16 sacks. The defensive unit collected 53 sacks. I think it's just there's so much with the foundation that just points to another strong year with Penn State, with a lot of the metrics and a lot of the things that you can use to assess offensive and defensive performance. I think they'll just be well above average again this season.
Well, if 10.5 for a season win total wasn't consistent enough for you, we have another one with Oregon here sitting at a season win total of 10.5. It's funny. It's funny you see the SEC, the top teams are around 9.5 because it's a little bit deeper of a conference, but it's 10.5 in the Big Ten for the top three anyway. And, Oregon, I had a nice power rating last year, is finishing at 24th. I thought they were pretty fortunate myself. Their returning production is kind of bad at ranking 104th. The recruiting's always been pretty good, though. Third in 2004, ninth in 2023, and in 2022, it's 13th. I don't mention 2025 because most of the time, unless you're Jeremiah Smith or something, those kids aren't playing too much. Yards per play, 6.39, opponent 5.14, which means really only a 1.25 net yard per play. I mean, for an undefeated team, you expect that to be a little bit higher. 33rd in rush EPA, 7th in drop back EPA, which was great. But their defense in rush EPA was 85th. They just had to score the ball, and they did. But you saw some potential losses last year. Opponent drop back EPA was 13th. Turnover margin plus 7th. Danny Lanning is back with a 10.5 win total. Josh, what do you think about the Ducks?
Just hard. I feel like this team does have some holes, and they're going to have to answer some questions. Particularly, do we trust Dante Moore to be the guy? And that's just a question that I don't have an answer to. I think we'll see that play out on the field. They like him. They're comfortable with him. They didn't bring in anyone else to necessarily push Dante Moore for the starting quarterback role. And I think that's just one of those things where we're going to have to kind of live with that and kind of see. One of the concerns that I had with Oregon last year is so many times it just felt like they could not bury teams, and they kind of played with their food a little bit. We saw it in the first two games of the season when they were massive favorites against Idaho and only ended up winning by 10 points in a game that was a 3-point game in the fourth quarter. And then the Boise State game where they were almost 3 touchdown favorites was back and forth. They also had closer than expected games against Michigan State, Maryland, and at Wisconsin, as I'm sure you're well versed on. And then this
gave that one away.
When they got to the playoff, it was just so non-competitive in the Rose Bowl against Ohio State. It was just so sad to see that defense completely out of position. There was plenty of long passes that Ohio State had explosive receivers going down the field, and Oregon could not could not get off the field in that game. So I think there are some losses. There are some holes on defense. I want to see the quarterback play shored up. I'm not necessarily completely convinced at this point that Dante Moore is the guy to get the job done. I think they have plenty of tricky spots, not necessarily that they're going to lose a lot of these games, but against the spread spots at Northwestern and at Rutgers could be very, very tricky. And then they got to go to Penn State in a game where you and I both think they're probably not going to win that game. And then also at Iowa, and I'm pretty certain that's a night game there at Kinnick, and I think that one's going to be really tough on November 8th. I think there's just a schedule that allows for another plethora of close games to be played and the doubt to creep in. If I was pressed, I'd go under 10.5, as I think this team surely has 2 losses on the schedule. And then they got to end the season at Washington. I think Washington's an emerging team. We'll get into them later, but I just think there's too many spots for Oregon that they're going to have to prove it. And you know what? This is a team who has done it for many years, so maybe they do once again.
I don't think they do. I took under 10.5 for their season win total. So obviously, if you listen to the show, you've heard that a few times. I think they're a pretty fortunate team having Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel. And this was a not like second year UCF Dylan Gabriel. This was a very, very polished Dylan Gabriel, right? That's older and ready to take over. I don't feel the same thing for Dante Moore at all, coming in from UCLA. And I didn't think he was all that good at UCLA. I know they do have consistency in their coordinators with Stein and Lupoy there. Danny Lang's a great coach so far, but I feel like this team was just fortunate in a lot of situations. And like you said, tricky spots is the name of the game here for their schedule, because at Rutgers after Indiana is tricky. Rutgers is one of the best returning production teams, as we'll talk about. At Iowa after Wisconsin, I know at least you have a bye, but dude, that is not a fun spot to go to and play. And Iowa's going to be at that point of the season ready to get a big win. And then I think at Washington. Oh, I can't wait to get to Washington, man. We're going to talk a little bit about Washington, but that is a very dangerous spot for their schedule. So from what people think, because you're not playing Ohio State and Michigan and you only get Penn State, they think that's some sort of a gift, but you're playing the upper echelon of the Big Ten here. You're not playing the scrubs towards the bottom. So I do see a couple hiccups here. I think they still could get in the playoffs with 9 or 10 wins, but I took under 10.5, and that number's dropping. So it looks like the market does agree with me. So we'll put that one to bed. Next power rated. Oh, I should mention, I do have them, believe it or not, 5 points under Penn State. So in the whiteout game, my number's more like 9, and I didn't bet it yet, but man, I'm looking at some point to bet this. And I think Penn State gets a serious revenge for last year. Next team I have power rated wise is Michigan. And Michigan's interesting. I mean, they finished actually pretty well last year, 16 points above the average team. I had to upgrade them towards the end, especially that second half. After that, it's the first half of where the Indiana was done. That second half of Indiana game, they made it real dangerous for Indiana. Michigan returns a lot of production for a team like Michigan, ranking 24th, 65% on offense, 64% on defense, 16th, 17th, and 9th the last 3 years of recruiting, 13th in the on-net transfer portal ratings. You got to love that. What you don't love is that they're minus 0.17 in net yards per play with Sherron Moore there, but that was worse before game 8 or 9. 79th in rush EPA, 113th in pass EPA, 29th in opponent rush EPA, 59th in opponent pass EPA, -2 turnover margin. Sherron Moore is back. Season win total looks like it's an 8.5. That's kind of low for Michigan, who won the national championship and made 2 playoff appearances, 2 in the last 3 years. What are your thoughts, Josh, on Michigan?
Yeah, and there's some varying opinion on the regular season win market, because you also can get an under 9.5. Over 8.5 is juiced pretty heavily. Under 9.5 is juiced pretty heavily. I think that number is probably 9-3. I think Michigan did a really good job of kind of salvaging their season after their offense showed so much ineptitude last season. And you just look at several spots in the middle of their schedule in 2024 where they just could not throw the ball. They had 32 passing yards against USC, 86 against Minnesota, 113 against Washington. And there was 9 times last year, my goodness, 10 times where they didn't break 200 yards. It was just one of these situations where their quarterback play was just so in. Now, they're really big on Bryce Underwood, and I think that's kind of the guy that they really like. They also brought in Mikey Keene from Fresno State, and it'll be one of those two that will obviously win the job and possibly turn this quarterback position around here for Michigan, which could be the key to them racking up the wins this season. I was impressed with how their defense played spirited football in that lockdown win against Northwestern, where they just destroyed the Wildcats 50-6. And then obviously the spirited rivalry game against Ohio State, where nobody gave them a chance, and they ended up just stifling that Ohio State offense on the road en route to a 13-10 win. And then they played really well in the bowl game. Give them credit. They showed up in that bowl game in the ReliaQuest Bowl. Alabama didn't show up, and you got to give them credit for the fact that they showed up, rallied the troops, and ready to go. And so this season, I think the non-conference is going to be very telling. I think that trip to Oklahoma in week 2 will kind of be a pace setter for this group to kind of define what this season is going to be. They also have tough road trips at Nebraska, at USC. They play Michigan State on the road, which who knows if Michigan State will be able to give them a game or not. I kind of lean to the fact that maybe Michigan State will be able to give them a little bit more of a tougher contest this season. There's a couple road trips to end the season before they host Ohio State. And it just seems like one of these situations, too, where maybe we're getting a little too quick on the turnaround for Michigan. I think Michigan could be a really solid Big Ten team this year, but to assume 9 wins, I'm not really interested. Certainly not going to assume 10. And from an against the spread standpoint, after that road trip to Oklahoma on September 6th, and before they gear up for a trip to Nebraska, sneaky old Central Michigan comes in. I'm sure Michigan will be laying 29.5 or so, but that pesky MAC Central Michigan, with what they have coming back and a new attitude and a new coaching staff, they hired their offensive line coach from Army. I think Central Michigan might come in there and give them a little bit more of a competitive game than people think. So against the spread, I'd look at that week 3 spot. Otherwise, tough trip to USC. They play Washington at home. At Northwestern and at Maryland could be against the spread nightmares before they host Ohio State. Just one of those where I'm not looking to bet on this team week to week necessarily, and I would not assume 10 wins. I don't think I would assume 9.
Bryce Underwood at quarterback. Donovan McCulley transfers from Indiana at wide receiver, which is nice. Samaj Morgan's there. Justice Haynes from Alabama comes in at running back, which is fun. You got Jordan Marshall there. Martin Klein upgrades to starting tight end. This team really covered at the end. So I had a terrible number on Michigan during the bowl game, and it made it that much sweeter when they freaking won outright, dude. I was like, yes. It's just like you see every market go against you. It pisses you off sometimes, especially the amount it did. And one of my favorite wins this year was that bowl game against Alabama. But in saying that, they're going to be favored. I put 9.5 because I'm just not completely sure how they're going to put together. This is not Jim Harbaugh, although they do have some really good guys coming in, but it's still not Harbaugh, man. So I just don't know what to think about Sherrod Moore yet. 8.5 to 1 to win the Big Ten, 25 to 1 to win the Natty. They've lost some serious guys like Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, Josiah Stewart on defense, right? Colston Loveland on offense, Khalil Mullings, Donovan Edwards. So they took some lumps too. You have to recognize that. But year 2 with Sherrod Moore, this Oklahoma game is going to tell me everything I need to know, I think. And that's what you're going to understand more about Michigan is after that Oklahoma game. Oklahoma is a team that's playing to see if their coach is going to get fired. So Michigan, the number 4 team in the Big Ten still, but I, like you, have a number around 9 too, and I don't want to mess with it, Josh. I'm seeing the same things you are.
Yeah, and I will say this too. There's going to be 2 things that really will be telling on how this team does this season. Are they going to find another sack dude to replace Josiah Stewart? Because they just really need to have production along the front 7 defensively and force negative plays, force tackles for loss, quarterback pressures, and then ultimately sack the quarterback on 3rd down. They're going to have to find a dude to collect the sacks this season. And then also, if you deep dive real quickly into the red zone offense was just so bad. 22 total red zone touchdowns over the course of the entire season in 39 attempts. It's 56% touchdown percentage. Only half the time they advanced it within the 20 did they score a touchdown. That number has to improve, or this team is just going to find themselves on the wrong end of close losses once again.
Yep, that's true. Those close losses is not what you want, and the defense can only do so much. If you're not scoring, and that's frustrating. That's frustrating to a defense too. So we'll see if Underwood can take care of them. Now to Indiana, which was the biggest surprise last year. I had them finishing at 18 points better than the average team. And
you had a little something on Indiana last season, if I recall.
That's right. I feel like I'm almost like saying it too much, but yeah, we had a nice future bet on them, as you know, and it's a great way to end of the year was seeing Indiana go to the playoffs, because you're not going to see 200-1 no more on teams like that.
Never again.
If you want 200-1, you're in the dumpster looking for numbers.
Akron.
But Bowling Green, right? But Indiana returns a decent amount of production. 38th they rank, 62% on offense, 61% on defense, 65th, 68th, and 25th in their recruiting over the last 3 years. 20 transfer portal rankings. Those pretty good, actually. 14th is what they rank on net. 6.51 net yards per play on offense, 4.28 on defense, which was a nice positive 2.23. Rush EPA 50th, first in dropback EPA last year, 5th in opponent dropback EPA, opponent rush EPA, and 16th in opponent dropback EPA. A big fat plus 15 in the turnover margin. Kirk Cignetti is back. All he does is win, and that's what he loves to say. His coordinators are back with Mike Shanahan and Bryant Haynes on defensive quarterback. Interesting transfer in Fernando Mendoza, but the market says that their season win total is an 8.5. That's interesting. Josh, what do you think about the Hoosiers?
I mean, and still, even so, one of the highest win totals I've ever seen on Indiana, and so this program has really ascended to new heights compared to where this team has routinely been when their win total was 4.5 or 5.5 for 10 years in a row. So this program has certainly been elevated. I think that they are a proud bunch. I think they really take on the persona of their head coach, Kurt Cignetti, who is very confident in himself and his group of players. And I think that this team, once again, will be a strong player in the Big Ten, despite the losses. Curtis Rourke was a great player for Indiana, but even so, he at times, he was very accurate with the ball, and they really feasted on a lot of weaker competition, especially early in the season before finding themselves in some games that were a little bit tighter, and even on the wrong end of the one against Ohio State. Fernando Mendoza comes in from Cal, and I really like what Fernando Mendoza did last season at California. Now, they're playing against much different competition. They're going to be playing in the cold and the snow, and so we'll see how his passing arm does in those sort of elements against the stiffer competition that they play this season. I think Roman Hemby is going to be just fine in the running back room, and they'll replace some of that lost production, and it'll be a little bit more easily absorbed. The skill position room is shored up with their top two guys back, and I think a couple other transfers that they're going to rely on. I got a couple guys from let's see here where they got JMU. They got a guy in from, and then they have a receiver who played or tight end from Tennessee, Holton Stays, who I think will be just fine as well. The offensive line, they believe, will be even stronger, and that really was a unit that paced Indiana last season, was their offensive line and their ability to run the football, stay ahead of the downs, really find themselves in favorable second and third down situations really all season long. They just were not in unfavorable spots. And so it'll be real interesting to see offensively if they can repeat that success. Defensively, they'll be fine. I think that the secondary will really be okay. I know they've got a couple of transfers that they've got coming in. One guy from Ole Miss, Ryland Gandy, and then Northern Illinois transfer, Marion Knighton, they really like. And so secondary should be okay. This team, it just seems like maybe they're not going to fly under the radar, and it's kind of the hunter is now the hunted. I think there's going to be some tough spots this season. At Oregon won't be super easy. At Iowa will be a tough one. And, of course, at Penn State on November 8th. The non-conference really doesn't provide a lot of challenges. I would certainly play them when they host FCS Indiana State. That'll be just a game you can't set the spread high enough. I really think that trip to Maryland could be tough, however. When they host UCLA on October 25th, and then they got to gear up for Penn State against the spread. I'm not going to say they're going to lose this game, but that Maryland game where they could be laying 12.5, 13.5 on the road. I'll want no part of that when they have to go to Maryland.
No part of that one, baby. You're right. Yeah, and you know what? We could do a whole show on spots. Me and Josh could, and maybe we will. Scheduling spots is going to be fun to bet, and they always are key to return on investment. You don't go against bad scheduling spots, and you kind of look for them. Don't get me wrong, the market does too, but sometimes it doesn't quite adjust enough. Yeah, man. The reason I bet Indiana last year was more of the schedule and the coach coming in and some of the players they pulled in. I did think they somewhat overachieved, but at the end of the day, man, my power ranking still ended up pretty high on them. It's a situation where I almost think they're going to be a little overvalued, to be honest with you. I think I'd rather maybe look to fade them a little bit. And Cignetti came in with a bang, but now he's got film on him. Everyone's got the tape on him. I mean, how about being 11-2 last year and 9-4 ATS? Those things paid bills last year. But man, this schedule is definitely going to be a hell of a lot harder facing these top teams. It's going to be kind of manageable a little bit later, is what I wrote. But yeah, losing Curtis Rourke, defense tackle, CJ West, some of the key guys that they lost. They do have some special players, like you said, Mendoza. Let's see if he can play in the cold, like you mentioned. I think that's huge. Elijah Sherratt is also special on wide receiver, left tackle Carter Smith. Yeah, I mean, if you really want to take a shot at them, the odds to win the NCAA is 100-1. But I'm not taking that. I had my fun with them last year, and we'll see what happens this year. I still have them as my 5th best team, just slightly power ranked under Michigan at 15.5 points better than the average team. So we'll see what Cignetti can do this year. See if he can repeat. USC is my next team, and 11.25 points above average is what they finished in my power ratings. Returning production rank, not great, 87th, 50 and basically 50 on defense, 50% returning. Recruiting 17th, 8th, and 2002 was 70th in recruiting. They must not have needed a bunch of people that year. Transfer portal net rankings is only 61st this year on 3. So they lost a lot as well as what they gained. 6.32 yards per play, 5.83 on defense, which was a net 0.49. Rush EPA 25th, pass EPA 76th, opponent rush EPA 102, opponent pass EPA 43rd, -3 in net turnover margin. Lincoln Riley's back. Offense coordinator Luke Ward and defense coordinator Deonton Lynn. You got Jaden Maeva back at quarterback. Brought some guys in, Prince Strachan from Boise. Interesting thing about USC, they're a covering machine, kind of 8-5 against the spread last year. Kind of like you never would have thought, because they disappoint, yet they still covered, which is interesting. I said a very manageable schedule. There's no Ohio State, no Penn State. I believe they get Michigan at home. What do you think about USC?
Just real interesting that they are very confident in Jaden Maeva, and he's still their dude there. I would have thought if any program would have went out into the transfer portal and plucked somebody that they could have had to handpick their quarterback, they would have picked from anybody that was available, and they're really confident in their guy. So it'll be real interesting to see if he can take a step. He really didn't take that step last year from coming from UNLV, and so if he does take that step, they could be a fairly dangerous program this season. I think I want to see who really emerges along the defensive line. I didn't feel like this group was one that really created a lot of havoc last season. The tackles for loss and the sack numbers were dropping. I think when you look at some of the rushing numbers, they really did okay. But when they played up in competition, when they played Minnesota, when they played Michigan, when they played Notre Dame, they just gave up so many rushing yards and could not get off the field in those situations, which is just really tough when you can't stop that. So teams are going to come after this group this season, especially on the road. I think at Illinois will be no cakewalk. They obviously go to Notre Dame. They've got to go to Nebraska. They go to Oregon. So there are some road bouts that I think will be prove pretty challenging for this group, but certainly could be 4-0 before that Illinois game. And I mean, if they can upset Notre Dame and if they sneak by Oregon, I mean, this will be a team that'll certainly have their hand in what could happen in the Big Ten if. Now, they've got to go out and do it. And at times last year and certainly in the 2023 season, especially after a couple of losses, the problem with USC is that their personnel has just seemed so apathetic. We saw it with Caleb Williams. We saw it with this group when they weren't running the wins in and they weren't competing for conference championships and for national championships. It just felt like the whole energy in the Coliseum and defensively, they were just so apathetic. And really, that's a culture thing that needs to get fixed. And I don't know what to tell Lincoln Riley to do that, but that culture of apathy is something I don't really want to bet into. So I would pass, knowing there are a couple of spots where they could have before we get out of October, they could have 3 losses, and I just don't want any part of the apathy if it gets to that point. Now, if they're 7-0 and they're going to Nebraska, different story. They're probably all locked in at that point. But if they're 4-3, I don't want any part of this group.
Yeah, I mean, Lincoln Riley is not liked by a lot of boosters. It's funny, 102 in rush EPA on defense. Like you mentioned, man, they were just getting run on, and that's the formula. Slow the game down, run on them, get your first downs. Don't give them a lot of possessions there to score points, and that was the secret sauce to beat this team. And 8.5 is 7.5 is what the market is. I agree with the market. If it was 8.5, I'd go under, but the market, kind of came in somewhat low for the Big Ten's pretty hated. It's funny as you see USC coming in at 7.5. It's like, wow, how hated is it if USC's only there? Their transfers didn't blow me away. Eli Sanders from New Mexico for the second running back, Jordan Wayman from some community college. Lincoln Riley should be on the hot seat, especially for not switching out that quarterback either. So I was a little bit confused about that. And, my number is 11.5 points better than the average team. And to be honest with you, I think I'm being too generous here. I think that I kind of have USC, Nebraska, Washington, and Illinois and Iowa all just bunched together with about the same power rating. You're about to find that out, but I'm not messing with their season win total. But that brings us to Nebraska, because Nebraska finally made a bowl game last year, Josh, and 8 was their power rating last year. They also had some hiccups. Returning production ranked 42nd, 69% on offense, 52% on defense. Recruiting 21st, 25th, and 41st the last 3 years. 41st in the on-net transfer ratings. This team was negative 0.08 yards per play. Drop back EPA 52nd, rush EPA 52nd, drop back 89th. Rush EPA on defense was really good at 12th, 92nd against the pass, though. Turnover margin met -2. Matt Rule is back. The market says 7.5 again on season win totals. What do you think about Raiola and the Nebraska Cornhuskers?
Just one of these situations where I do like that Dana Holgorsen comes in and is going to be much more involved with the offensive unit this season. I think that Raiola is going to take a step. There are a couple things. I think Nebraska will be a much improved team this season and should certainly be 3-0 before hosting Michigan. There's a couple of things at play here. Once again, we saw the untimely turnovers and just some of this flippant play continue to handicap the Huskers, and we've seen this for 10 years with Nebraska, where they've been plagued with poor red zone play and untimely turnovers. Directly cost them the game against Illinois. It cost them the game against Iowa. I mean, they lost to UCLA at home. They had a chance to beat USC and just couldn't do it. I was very, very concerned about that. And also another thing that Matt Rule is just kind of known for, their exceptionally conservative play offensively in the second half. We saw it not really penalize this team, but against UTEP, they just didn't even hardly attempt to throw the ball in the second half. Same thing against Colorado. They built this big first half lead, did not throw the ball, sat on the ball in the second half. They did the same thing against Northern Iowa. And it was just very concerning to see the ultra-conservative nature of this bunch in the second half of football games. They're going to have to open it up because they're going to need to win games in the second half this season. And so I really hope they pivot with Holgorsen there and really change the way that they call these second halves, because it was so maddening. If you laid any points with them or if you bet any other overs, they just completely throttled down in the second half. I want to see the turnovers. It just has to improve. At some point in time, this turnover bug and this flippant play with the ball in the second half of games just has to go away for Nebraska. Now, I think that they have a pretty good nucleus of players offensively that they like, and a couple guys in the skill room that'll step up, namely Isaiah Hunter, Dane Key, I think will be fine. Luke Lindenmeyer, the tight end, step up just fine. The offensive line will probably be okay. I think they're pretty deep along the offensive line, so even with injury, they should be fine there. They'll probably lean on the run game again. I think Emmett Johnson will be just fine, but I don't know. For me, it's all about the coaching tendencies and the way that they coach football in the second half has just come to bite them too many times for me to really want to get seriously excited about this bunch. I think if they beat Michigan, that'll be very telling because it's just an opponent they haven't had a lot of success against. And other than that, I think this could be a fairly successful season if the coaching staff can finally put together, full games and full seasons for full season for Nebraska.
Yeah, they tricked us last year, though. They smoked Colorado at home, and then freaking it's just how they lose to Ohio State by a couple points, and then they get dumped by Indiana. Well, first they got dumped by Indiana. I guess that their betting spot was against Iowa State, but you can say, how are you losing some of those games that you lost last year to, what was it, Rutgers, Illinois? Well, Illinois is a little bit more understandable, but UCLA, that was a weird loss, right? Their schedule this year, though, believe it or not, is very doable after Michigan and Penn State, because after Michigan and Penn State, you kind of have the bottom tier of the Big Ten, because you got the Michigan State at home. You got, of course, their non-conference, Cincinnati, Akron, and Houston Christian. Very easy non-con. At Minnesota, at Maryland, not too scary. Northwestern at home. Iowa at home at least, and then USC at home. So very doable schedule there, because, you're not getting a ton of the no Washingtons and no Illinois this year, right? You're looking okay there. So they could make a little bit of noise, but not enough for me to bet. So I'm kind of agreeing with the market around the 7.5 as well. Another 11.5 points better than the average team. Now let's move on to Washington, my friend. And I'm excited for Washington because I think this team is ready to take a step back up. And you remember just 2 years ago, they're in the national championship game against Michigan when they were in the Pac-12 before it dissolved. Last year, the power rating was 8 points above the average. Return production ranked 79th, 48% on offense, 55% on defense, recruiting 51st, 26th, 95th. Transfer portal on net, 15th. I like that. Dude, this team was a .95 net yards per play. They're almost a full yard per play there, which was somewhat impressive to me. 72nd on rush EPA, 27th at pass. Their defense couldn't stop the run at 109th, but their defense against the pass was 7th, +2 in turnover margins. Jed Fish, big fish in a big pond, baby. You are in the Big Ten. But, man, they promoted offense coordinator Jimmy Darby and Ryan Walters, who was just a head coach at Purdue. They bring him in. They have a great quarterback. Desmond Williams is stepping in to start, and I like Desmond Williams a lot. And he just won some competition, too, that last week or two. Forgot exactly what it was, but they got some good players on the transfer portal. Amari Evans from Penn State at wide receiver. They still have Denzel Boston there. They have Jonah Coleman at running back. Quinton Moore at tight end. I am not worried about that part at all. This team was nothing last year. They lost everything to Alabama, and man, they just kind of won a decent amount of games, 6 for 7. I mean, Ohio State and Oregon, right? They're at least at home for this team. At Michigan's rough, but there's some serious winnable games here. Oregon, obviously, at the end is going to set the tone. But, man, this team, 7.5 is their win total for a reason. I think that the market's a little bit high on them, too. And I agree with it. What are your thoughts on Washington?
I mean, I really like what I saw in the bowl game from Damon Williams, and I think that he's a quarterback that is just poised to take a next step this season for Washington. I think this group could be really shored up okay offensively. I'm concerned about the offensive line. You mentioned all the skill guys, and I was going to go through Jonah Coleman, Amari Evans, Denzel Boston, but the one pause that I have on this group is this offensive line allowed 80 tackles for loss last season, and they surrendered 39 sacks. And I'm really concerned about this group and their play. They're adding in a couple of transfers that they're going to rely on to replace some lost production, but they have got to be able to protect the quarterback. And if they do, this offense could be absolutely electric. Far too many negative plays last season, which penalized them in various spots on the road, which we saw a tough road slate last year to end the season. At Iowa, at Indiana, at Penn State, at Oregon was just a brutal stretch of road games in their final 6. This season, the schedule lightens up, and they find some teams in some favorable spots. I think this is a bunch that will probably be 3-0 when they, well, certainly will be 3-0 when they host Ohio State, which will be just a massive, massive spot for them at home. Now, Ohio State's off a bye, but I think that'll be a really interesting spot for, and a telling spot for where they're going to be at for the in totality of their season. And some of the other road games aren't necessarily as brutal as they were last year. So what I want to see is, can the defense build on some of the positive metrics that they had last season? I think that when you look at Washington, they were kind of middle of the road when you're looking at defending the pass and the rush explosiveness that was allowed. They struggled in that bowl game against Louisville, struggled against Oregon with the rushing yards that they allowed. Struggled against Penn State, so they're going to have to shore up the run D on the front seven, which I think they like their guys this season. They really don't have a major sack player, so they're going to have to focus a little bit more on sending a little pressure from the outside because their front seven doesn't really get to the quarterback a lot. But I think this is a group that if the transfers hit and the guys that they brought in from the portal, if they gel, this bunch could be one of those teams that is a little bit more surprising than some of these other teams in the Big Ten and could make a little bit of noise, save for the home spots that they have against Ohio State and Illinois and Oregon. I think this could be a little bit of a surprise team and certainly an against the spread darling this season for me.
100% agree with that. And I'm excited to see the quarterback play, and Heisman is maybe something to look at here. 150 to 1 at Circa. It's a big fat number. Not saying I didn't take it. Illinois is the next one, and they finished 6.25 points better than the average team. I wonder why I had them so low, because they kicked butt last year. I have to relook at that. Did I write that down wrong? I thought I had them better than that. They were 10-3 last year. I will say they were fortunate in some games. Their net yards per play was only 0.41. They returned a ton of production this year. They're fourth in returning production out of all the teams, 78% and 72%. Recruiting, just 49th, 38th, 46th, nothing special there. On net transfer ratings of 31st. Rush EPA 61st, dropback EPA 29th. Opponent rush EPA was only 99th, and then opponent dropback EPA was 44th. I think maybe that's why. I think that they're just outperforming their true numbers there with Luke Altmaier at quarterback. But Brett Bielema is back, and he's matured. Offensive coordinator is back, Barry Looney, and defensive coordinator Aaron Henry. This team, tons of return production, amazing against the spread last year at 9-3-1. What do you think about the Fighting Illini?
I mean, I was prepping this team, and this group looks really ready to go. Luke Altmaier is poised to take another step, and I think if he does and he can improve off of his performances from last season with a 22-6 touchdown interception ratio, 2,700 yards, I think that this team could be really dangerous. I think they're going to lean in on that running game. That's kind of the quintessential Brett Bielema approach, is to lean in. And they've got Caden Fegan, who's 6'3", 250, and then he'll be spelled by Aiden Lottery, who I think was serviceable last season as well. So this 1-2 punch at running back could really wreak havoc on some of these front sevens in the Big Ten, which should open up the play action pass game. I think that we will see the completion percentage from Luke Altmaier improve from last season. The yards per pass should improve, and I think this offense really looks ready to go. The offensive line has all 5 starters back, and just a bunch that should really have very, very little holes on offense. I think the defensive returning production looks really good when you look at the size on the defensive line. I think that they'll be just fine once again. The secondary returns really all 4 producers in the secondary, and they have some depth if they rotate in nickel situations. I think that Illinois is one of those teams where when you look at them on paper in the 2 deep, they're really buttoned up and shored up. I think special teams, the coverage units and the special teams units kicking game will be just fine. So I really don't see a lot of holes for Illinois. And I think that they have some of these tougher foes in Big Ten play. They get them at home, right? I think when you look at them, their Super Bowl is going to be when they host Ohio State October 11th, and that'll be really the wow factor.
That's all they have of the Big Four, though, unless you're counting Indiana as the Big Five. That's all they have is Ohio State, man.
Yeah, and I think this is a team that could really get on a roll and start playing some confident football. Against the spread, I mean, you can lay any number against FCS Ohio Valley Conference bottom feeder Western Illinois, who will just not, they'll score 70 points against Western Illinois. And then really Western Michigan in week 3 would be a great spot to play this team, as this is the second Big Ten opponent for Western Michigan. Generally, they play up against their first Big Ten opponent, kind of lay down against the second one. So there's that. They've got home bouts against Rutgers and Maryland, which will be favorable spots. They might have, that tough road trip at Washington will be really interesting as well after that Ohio State game. Win or lose, I think that could be one that'll be real interesting to watch. But I think Illinois has the schedule that lines up well. I think they have a lot of the returning production and the personnel. They are just one of those teams that I think could really start to really build some traction and some momentum. It'll be real disappointing if this team is 7-5 again.
They at least get the bye week after Ohio State, though, before they go to Washington. So they do get that. Yeah, I mean, what I wrote down is this team everything looks just too good for them. My only problem is that everyone loves them. And you know what happens when everyone loves something. And but otherwise, why not? That schedule, all you got is Ohio State there, and you got to win a few road games. But man, it's just life. You got to win road games. It's just, can we trust Brett Bielema? I'm not sure yet, but man, he's really warmed up to me over the past few years. Iowa's next, and yep. I had them finish 9 points above average, even though I have them sitting again with Illinois and everybody else there. I mentioned at 11 points, 11.5 points better than the average team. And I just want to say return production's in the middle, 63rd. Or recruiting's kind of been where it normally is, 27th, 30th, 41st. Net yards per play, 0.61, very middle-ish in the EPA, but their worst was the dropback EPA once again. But I will say this offense at least went from worse to something better last year, because, man, that was just sad to see in 2003 how you have the number one defense statistically and then 134th offense statistically. It was very, very much of a head scratcher last year. Kirk Ferentz, there you go. Tim Lester is back, of course, because they took a step forward. And offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, Phil Parker. They got a quarterback named Mark Gronowski from South Dakota State. What's funny is that this team got a few guys from that university and State College of South Dakota. Maybe you know more about that over there in the north. Kamari Moston is back as a running back, promoted. Jazian Patterson. Seth Anderson is back at wide receiver with Reese Vanderzee. This team was 6-1 against the spread, but I feel like they lost a lot of players over to the NFL draft over the past few years, but they seem to figure it out. I mean, season win total 7. What are your thoughts on the Hawkeyes?
Well, if you like Iowa, I mean, it's a program that has been built on a staple of consistency of exquisite special teams play, sound coverage units, really rock solid defense that plays well on third down into the red zone. They don't make mistakes. They don't get beat deep. They might give up some lengthy drives, but this team is not one to allow explosives. They are just really bowed up in the red zone. They force a lot of field goals, and it's just kind of what you want from that sort of perspective of teams that are going to be in competitive football games and finding a way to win those games. Now, last season, it was interesting because they did not find a way to win against UCLA and Michigan State, two opponents that I thought they should have beaten, and they just could not get it done on the road. The quarterback play was really baffling with Cade McNamara, who has now transferred to FCS, just not really taking that leap that you thought that this bunch would take in his second year there. Mark Gronowski, I think, will be a much different story. Comes in from South Dakota State. He is an absolutely dynamic quarterback that can make plays with his legs. He's got a very accurate arm. He can make all the NFL throws, and really an underutilized player even at that level. Now, we have done a lot of FCS content. I've done a lot of FCS content over where I'm at the Action Network, and South Dakota State was in the mix quite a bit because of how they were rated at FCS. And they had prolific receivers. They had a guy, Griffin Wilde, who transferred to Northwestern and should have been an FBS receiver all along. And they had a great offensive line. And they really underutilized a lot of their weapons in the passing game, which caused a little friction in the South Dakota State locker room last season before they finally had a bye week and figured it out. But Gronowski will fit in just fine here. I think that this offense is going to be one that takes that step, has more explosivity, has more downfield passing, and really lights it up in a way that we have not seen since, my goodness, maybe Brad Banks in 2003 with Iowa. I think that this is going to be a group that really figures it out, because we've just seen time and time again for 15 years with Iowa just the conservative nature and leaning on the run game and such predictability, and it just gets so old to watch. But I think this year this offensive group will take strides, which will help them when they're playing teams like Oregon and Penn State and Indiana. Now, there are a couple of really the two tricky road spots, I'll say, are they got to go to USC after they host Oregon. They're off a bye when they host Oregon. Then they got to go to USC. And then ultimately that day after Thanksgiving game at Nebraska is really kind of one of those where it's always a physical, close game. It always comes down to the last 4 minutes. And so it'll be real interesting to see if this bunch can win that or not. But I think the schedule is actually fairly favorable. I think they get Penn State in a pretty good spot at home. I think the non-conference is such that will be conducive to wins. I think if I had to take a position with Iowa, I'd go over 7.5.
Okay, and I think I wrote 7, but it was juiced to the over. Yeah, like you said, schedule no Ohio State or Michigan. You get both Penn State and Oregon at home. Dual threat quarterback coming in from FCS, like you said, Gronowski. And I mean, it's just I don't want to go under. I still think I was going to have a stout defense like they do, and the offense, if they take a step forward, they could be the team that surprises. I don't want to discount them because I do think that they're still an upper echelon of the old Big Ten West, right? They're still, Wisconsin kind of faltered a little bit, but they went up a little bit. So there you have it. Minnesota, row the boat, man. How many boats are you going to keep rowing this year? It's funny, PJ Fleck. He is a guy it's hard to figure out. He's kind of off and on. It feels like over the years. And I look at their ATS from 2024, 10-2-1. For time reasons, Josh, we only got a third of the show left. I'm going to kind of power through this, but they're a team that you're just kind of meddling. It's 0.62 net yards per play, kind of in the middle of everything. They had that weird loss against North Carolina at first, and then just kind of impressed throughout the rest of the year, ended up 8-5. And, they have a pretty easy schedule minus at Ohio State and at Oregon, but the rest could all be a lot of wins. Running back Darius Taylor should be special. Linebacker Maverick Baranowski and safety Coy Parrish is back. Yeah, man, they both keep staying afloat. What do you think?
Interesting team. They have to replace some pieces on both sides of the football. I think PJ Fleck is an interesting character who is just kind of running through and doing his thing up there in Minneapolis. I think Minnesota will be serviceable once again. I think that they will probably be kind of one of those 8-4 teams. I did fade them in week 1, laying 18 points at home against the University of Buffalo, who I think is my pick to win the MAC, and I think will be a very improved and surprising Buffalo team. But I think the schedule just calls for one, and we'll be quick about this. I think the schedule for Minnesota just calls for one where there's not a lot of spots to trip up. I think that at Ohio State and at Iowa will be really tough road games, and then at Oregon. But I think this bunch is one that can certainly win 7 or 8 games.
Yeah, and that's just because of schedule too, because this was finally the jump that I had 11.5 points better than the average team in my power ratings for Iowa, and it drops to Minnesota at 7.5 points. It's a kind of a big section of drop here from this next tier of teams, and Minnesota takes the top of these next tier teams. So no disagreement there. It's just that they have such a favorable schedule, playing the easiest of the Big Ten. They're getting a lot of teams that they need at home. Nebraska, I mean, they get to play Purdue, Rutgers at home. Their non-con is easy at Cal, Northwestern State, and Buffalo, which, like me and you both
probably
like,
win.
We'll be watching that Buffalo game. Michigan State, obviously, at home, and then Wisconsin and Northwestern, right? I mean, so they get the easier side of the Big Ten. Speaking of my Badgers, yeah, man, I it's funny. I don't know what to think of this Badgers team. I struggle a little bit with them. I have them and Rutgers pretty close right now. I might as well just go right to Wisconsin. Everybody hates them, man. And that's kind of makes me almost want to buy them, but I still say under 5.5. But dude, if you listen to any college football podcast, any radio show, I cannot find one freaking person that likes Wisconsin. They're negative 0.14 yards per play. They quit their last game at home with the Axe, which was just disgusting to look at. Luke Fickell, is he a good coach or not? He did have Marcus Freeman as his defensive coordinator back in Cincinnati, and the offensive coordinator was there too of Notre Dame, right? So it's like one of those situations where, like, was it him or the coordinators? I will say that I like the move getting Jeff Grimes, offensive coordinator. Mike Tressel stays there, which, I don't know about Mike Tressel, but either way, Billy Edwards is coming from Maryland, which a lot of people don't like him. I thought he kind of outplayed the skill of that team in a way. Maybe I could be wrong. Maryland did have a lot of draft picks, but I thought Billy Edwards was actually not the problem there. So he could be good. They got two nice young running backs, Dylan Jones and Darian Dupree. So we'll see if they can get back to being running back Tucker Ashcraft at tight end. But this team got hammered in the portal, but they also picked up some dudes. Yeah, they're really low ranked in the net portal, 65th. But if you look at like 247, they're pretty high in the portal. And they actually did a decent job recruiting over the last year or two, too. But, man, this schedule, man, is really why everybody hates them. And their October is just disgusting. And I'll read their October to you right now. It is at Michigan, Iowa, Ohio State, at Oregon. And then if you want to throw Washington for November, you can too. But, dude, this is brutal. And not even mention they're going to Alabama in September. So, yeah, it's a 5.5 season win total for a reason, isn't it, Josh?
Just really tough with the slate, and I think this could be a marginally improved team this year, a team that's not used to not going to a bowl game. I mean, it was the first non-bowl game in, 20 years for Wisconsin, just uncharacteristic.
22 years. 22 years.
And really, Luke Fickell has to start feeling the pressure at some point. I was really surprised. I mean, they landed on Billy Edwards. They like him. It better be him over Danny O'Neil, because no team in the Mountain West had worse quarterback play last season than San Diego State. And so it better not be Danny O'Neil. It better be Billy Edwards. But I think this bunch could be marginally improved. They have got to figure out offensively. The explosivity was just not there. It felt like when they were trying to the passing offense was just marginal, and it seemed like when you're looking at the run metrics, it's just so uncharacteristic of Wisconsin to just not have that explosivity in those game after game after game where you're running for 250 and you could lean on those big hogs up front. It just did not seem like it was that way this season or last season. This year, it's really all about the schedule, because even with an improved team, I mean, those last 9 games, at Alabama, and then, like you mentioned, the 4 in October, and then even in November, I mean, you got Washington coming in off a bye, at Indiana, hosting Illinois, and then at Minnesota. I mean, they could be an underdog in 8 games. It just might be one of those where they have got to beat Maryland after they double back from Tuscaloosa, and they're going to have to pull some upsets in order to get to a bowl game. Otherwise, I mean, you got to kind of wonder what Luke Fickell's doing here. It's really the first stop he's had where he hasn't had a lot of success. And so I really just don't see the talent level being as such to where they can really make a leap into the Big Ten standings this season. And I think the schedule just calls for another year where there's just a lot of frustration. Thanks, Bobby. I mean, my goodness. Yeah. San Diego State's passing offense was.
Could he be worse than Braden Locke, though? I mean, Braden Locke was pathetic last year.
He might be. So just the most brutal schedule in the Big Ten, I will say. Wisconsin is just so vicious.
I think he's got a great last name, man. So you got to at least give him props for that. I think that, 5 if you're lucky to be favored in this year. I wrote 5 if lucky. It's probably 4 games that you're favored in. And yeah, man, it is all about Edwards. And if he's bad, it's gone. It's curtains. And I will say, everybody hates this team. The books should lose their ass this year, right? On Wisconsin. So we'll see. But Will Pauling was a tough loss. Jack Chaney on defense, Jaheim Thomas, and Hunter Wohler are, or Hunter Waller was a very tough loss, right?
Yeah.
I just don't know what to think yet. I think they have to go through Dylan Jones and Durian Dupree if they want to have success and get back to the run. And unfortunately, that whole Phil Longo thing is going to leave a mark still, and I think it's going to last maybe until next year, even, right? So we'll see what happens there. But I'm sad for my Badgers, but at the same time, when you go in with low expectations and they do something okay, all right. If they make a bowl game, I think you give Fickle another year with this schedule. So there you have it. Speaking of coaches who I always liked is Jonathan Smith from Michigan State. Now, this Michigan State team wasn't good last year, but we gave them a honeymoon year last year. And, Jonathan Smith kind of comes in and, they're not a bad recruiting team. They're kind of in the middle in the 20s, right? Sometimes you hit 30. But this team's really good in returning production, 16th in the nation in returning production. Negative. Oh, no, they were actually a complete flat 0 in net yards per play. Their problem was drop back EPA. Everyone threw all over them. They could stop the run, ranking 21st in rush EPA. Drop back was terrible. And they also couldn't run the ball well themselves like a normal Michigan State team would. But they do got some transfers this year, decent in the net transfer portal rankings at 21st. Their season win total is also 5.5. What do you think about Michigan State?
I mean, I want to believe in this team, and I want to think that Aiden Childs takes a step. I think offensively they can be okay with the additions of, truly, Krishan McCray. Big play McCray from Kent State will be a welcomed addition in the receiver room. Nick Marsh, I think, will be okay. With the leading receiver for Michigan State, I just wonder how the trench play will be with Michigan State. I think offensively they were just kind of middling along the offensive line this season, and it really handicapped this bunch when they just could not run the football with consistency. At numerous times they were under 3 yards a carry, and it was just really a struggle to put so much on Childs' shoulders, and he just couldn't do it all. And they tried to remain competitive, but they couldn't stay on the field. They couldn't convert third down. But for me, it's all the front seven on defense. They had 6 games in a row last year where they did not record a sack, and they've got 3 guys back, and they're adding a few transfers along the defensive line. I think the group should improve, but they have got to get more pressure, because when they just allow quarterbacks to sit back there and assess the defense, the coverage unit just didn't stand a chance. And we saw that at times last season in the pass efficiency numbers, and with the amount of pass yards that they allowed against some of these teams, it was just one of those situations where they couldn't stop it. And so defensively, this team is going to have to be shored up. I think that there are some real interesting spots in the schedule where they could win some games maybe they shouldn't. I think they'll play Michigan competitively at home. I think they'll play UCLA competitively at home. I think they'll play Boston College competitively at home. But, man, they've got to win some of those road games in order to achieve a bowl game, and I'm not sure they're ready to take that step.
I know. I have them 3.5 points better than the average team. When Wisconsin's sitting at 6, and I have Rutgers that I accidentally passed, my bad, at 6.5. So just quick on Rutgers. This is an interesting team. You wonder if Schiano takes a step forward, because you keep waiting for it. You're waiting for those old Rutgers teams that he used to coach that, won a lot back in that awful ACC. Or wait, it was the what division was it back then? Was it like the Big East back then?
Yeah,
yeah, it was the Big East with Rutgers. And it's a situation where I think that they returned a lot of production, but is it good production? I don't like the quarterback, Kalik Manis, all that back. I don't like him that much. KJ Duff is being promoted to a top starting receiver. Ian Strong's back, but they have a CJ Campbell, I believe, at running back there. They have a couple new running backs because they lost one Monagai to the draft, and the Bears actually drafted him. They're 7-5-1 against the spread, meddling. They have a medium hard schedule, though. Again, see, Rutgers is always gotten hurt in the schedule. Last year was actually a better schedule than it was this year, because they finished 7-6, got to a bowl game, but now they got Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State. Kind of right back into the frying pan again. So they got that 1 year break with a decent schedule, but it wasn't enough. That's why their season win total is also at 5.5. This should be favored in 5 games. I think I threw 6. I expect 6 wins. It'd be fun to see Rutgers do something crazy this year, but it's just like another Big Ten team to me.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Catley McManus really did not take that step. Last year, there were times, especially when they were playing weaker foes like Howard and Akron, where this team just could not throw the ball with really any effectiveness when you go back and look at the numbers and deep dive into that. Now, they leaned on the run game against those 2 weaker opponents. But really, they also won some games they probably should not have won when you look at the win against Minnesota that they did, and then also that game against Washington, which was, I believe, a Friday night game that they hosted Washington. They were 1-point favorites, and they ended up winning by 3. There were some questionable calls there. It went against Washington. Probably could have lost that one. And I just feel like replacing Kyle Manunjai is going to be very, very hard. He was a great running back that ran the ball with anger. He was great between the tackles. He had some explosiveness. No wonder why he was drafted in the late rounds by Chicago Bears there. But I like you say, I don't know if I love a lot of the returning production that this bunch brings back. I think the one thing I like about Schiano coach teams is that the defensive effort is there and they play real spirited football and they don't quit. So I like Rutgers when they're catching a big number because they really don't pack in the tent and fold it early. But we may not get a ton of those situations this season until the last couple of weeks of the year. Now, I think that they'll breeze through their non-conference. They've got a couple MAC teams that they play, and then FCS bottom feeder Norfolk State. And then really we're going to have to see these guys ratchet it up early when they play Iowa, Minnesota, and Washington, because that'll be really telling to set the pace for what this team's going to be. If they don't win those 3, it's probably a 7-5, 6-6 type of season for Rutgers. And really, if the quarterback play doesn't take a step, they could this could go sideways for Rutgers quickly.
It also could go sideways. Yep.
It really could. I mean, when you look at some of these road games at Illinois, at Ohio State, at Washington, they may not win a game on the road this season other than Purdue.
100%. I agree. It could go sideways for them. And, it's a team. It's just hard to trust still for me, especially now that they have a harder schedule. Bobby said John Smith always steals a game. And Michigan State could steal a game. I don't disagree with you. And he's also saying Rutgers' favorite pass pattern was the 3-yard quick slant. Yeah, eventually you kind of figured that out, right? Quick slants, right? Just pull the linebackers up a little bit. This Rutgers team is just they're going to be worse at the run, like you said. And I wouldn't shock me because of everybody they return that they could get a little better too, though, Bobby. It's just I'm not messing with them because their season win total just tempting you to take over at 5.5. I'm not messing with it. But we have another one here in Northwestern that's an interesting team. Last year, they were terrible on offense, 111th in rushing EPA, 129th in pass EPA. But this team's got a big transfer now in Preston Stone from SMU, who I thought could start for a ton of teams if it had SMU didn't find a better quarterback on their roster, right? And, you got David Braun back there at coach and consistency at offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator. What do you think about Northwestern, the Nerds? Can the Nerds start beating some people up? Revenge of the Nerds, right?
Yeah, and I just thought that this bunch played some – the schedule down the stretch was pretty brutal when they had to play Ohio State, Michigan, Illinois, Iowa, and they just didn't have it offensively. This team has not been dynamic offensively for some time, but I think the addition of Preston Stone will really help. I think this group really likes the offensive line that they have, especially some of the transfers along the offensive line, and they should be able to run the football with a little more consistency. One thing about Northwestern is they were really committed to the run last season, even when it wasn't working, and they would just run the ball so frequently because the pass game and the quarterback play with Lausch passing the ball barely over 50%, 7 to 8 touchdown interception ratio. They just didn't have it. Preston Stone will bring some dynamic offense, some ability with him to run some dynamic offense. I love the receiver getting Griffin Wilde. Again, he was a guy that was recruited by Big 12 teams out of high school, and they just didn't come to the table, but probably should have been an FBS receiver all along. He comes in from South Dakota State and will be a guy that will just be electric for Northwestern. I think the defense is going to be one of those that is just kind of a poor man's Iowa where they bend but don't break. They give up a few yards, but they're really sound on third down. They're really sound in the red zone, and I think that will really help this group this season. When I look at the win total of 3.5, I would play over. I feel like this team just will have a lot of shots on goal this year to try to rack up the wins. Tulane, 6.5-point underdogs, but that'll be a winnable game. Western Illinois will be winnable. Louisiana Monroe and UCLA at home will be winnable, as will be Purdue. They always play well in Lincoln, and so that Nebraska game, October 25th, will be winnable. Minnesota's winnable. It just feels like this team will have plenty of opportunities to get to that fourth or fifth win. And actually, there's a derivative market out there where you can take Northwestern to win 6 or more games, and you can still get about plus 480 on that. So it just would not surprise me if this clicks right away for Northwestern, and if this bunch can steal a game that maybe they shouldn't. And you can find a situation where Northwestern, you look up and it's like, my goodness, this team only needs to win one of their last 3 and they're going to make a bowl game. It just seems like one of those seasons where the turnaround could be coming for Northwestern.
We don't talk about what we're betting on until
Never.
maybe the day, but we don't. And then we send each other's notes the day before. Last week, I bet Northwestern over 3.5 wins. And, as a Badger fan, you got to bet on your rivals sometimes. And, dude, I mean, this is wrong. At Tulane lost a lot of stuff. It wouldn't shock me if Preston Stone goes in and works Tulane. He's got some, experience over there too from SMU. Western Illinois, that's a win. You got UCLA at home. I think that's a win too. I know that they're not favored, but I'll be betting on them. Louisiana Monroe, that's a win. Already at least 3 wins. If at least 3, you got Purdue at home. That is 4 for sure. Yeah, you can find 2 more wins versus Minnesota, at USC, at Nebraska. Maybe one of those slip up. There is room for 6 wins, man. That's a hell of a fine plus 480. What you do is just put more on your 3.5, and you put a little hook there, a little sprinkle on the plus 480 to win 6 games and get to a bowl game. This Preston Stone kid is better than, I think, Billy Edwards that the Badgers got. This is a really legit transfer quarterback that Northwestern has, and he fits their system too. He's going to come in with a chip on his shoulder from what happened last year to him. So this was a simple win total for me to bet, and I'm glad we're both on the same side of that. So there you have it. But yeah, you're right. Yeah. The offensive line is the question, Bobby. And I even with that bad offensive line, I can see 4 wins here.
Let's just think about one other thing real quick. We just touched on this when we covered USC, how that team has just been prone to having the apathy set in. And if that USC season is not going how they would hope, and they have a couple of losses, Michigan, at Illinois, at Notre Dame, we're talking a 30-year revenge spot here for Northwestern when they go to the Coliseum. These teams last met in the 1996 Rose Bowl, and that game could mean a lot more for Northwestern than
is it does. Darnell Autry? Darnell Autry is the running back back then? There you go.
So just could be one of those to file away that situation could line up well for Northwestern. That game might mean a lot more for them than it does USC on November 8th.
All right, let's we're over on Northwestern. We both have agreement on that one for sure, and I love it. I'll be looking for some alts just to have a little fun. Maybe I find an alt 5 and just be happy at +2 something. I'll look for that. We got a few teams we got to blow through. UCLA. I mean, here's the thing with UCLA. I am not a fan of Iamaleava, and maybe it was his parents doing it, the agent, whatever it was. But this is a completely late step to be leaving Tennessee. It's kind of late, and you have to learn this offense. I know Garbers went to Tennessee, which is just still blows my mind at how that all went down. But now it's just the pressure is going to mount up here, and you are not in a school that you get the same recruits. Their 2024 recruiting class was ranked 99th. Their 200,000, and that's because they lost the coach and Foster came in. That the recruiting in 2023 was 37th. I mean, this team was just not good, but I will say they did get better, kind of similar to Michigan, right? When the season went on, they do have a 5.5 win total, mostly because of Iamaleava there. My early numbers only 5 wins, but man, tough non-con, right? Utah, that could be a loss right off the bat. at UNLV. I know UNLV lost a ton of people, but still, a decent program there over the last 2 years. Ohio's at State and Penn State's not going to be fun. It's all about Nico. Really, can he keep going? And is Foster that coach that might have shocked me a little bit last year? So I do have a little bit of optimism, but I can't power rate them more than 2 points better than the average team until I see it. Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, just so many question marks. Every game they won last year, they won 5 games. Every single one of them was a one-score game. And you can make the case that they should have not beaten Hawaii, should have not beaten Rutgers, maybe should have not beaten Iowa. And even that Fresno State game at the end of the season was really competitive. Last year, I was on UCLA under 5.5 and really didn't have to sweat that one too badly because of all the early season losses. And I just don't know. I think, Nico kind of had to find a spot to land after the whole Tennessee saga, and I don't know if this is where he really wanted to be or not. For me, this all comes down to the trench play. How are they going to perform along the offensive line where you have 0 starters returning and there's 5 guys that are transferring in? It's going to take some time for this bunch to gel, and they're going to have to gel because they allowed 34 sacks last season and 65 tackles for loss. And if the run game isn't clicking and it's all going to fall on Nico, yeah, he's a great quarterback and whatever else, but if he doesn't have time to protect the ball, or if they don't protect him and he doesn't have time to assess where to go with the ball, it just could be one of those things where this offense could really struggle, and they're going to find themselves in defensive bouts like they were last season where they can't run the ball, they can't move the ball effectively, and they're going to have to play slower paced offense and defensive football games. And I just really wonder, the second year in a row, if this goes sideways quickly, if they lose against Utah, if they lose against UNLV, if they lose Penn State, Michigan State, and they've got 4 losses and they've still got all these deep teams here at the back half of the schedule, is this locker room going to be lost second year in a row? I don't know. I want some more insight on if this team is really buying into what Deshaun Foster is trying to do here, but I'm just not a believer in this program right now, and it's very hard to see this team making a bowl. I just don't see it.
It's going to be interesting to watch with Foster and Iamaleava there for sure. If you want to keep going to putrid offenses, Maryland's next, 117th and drop back EPA, 93rd and running. They're, believe it or not, only a minus 0.23 net yards per play. So I look at this team. Mike Loxley's back somehow again. This guy never dies. Offense coordinator is now Pep Hamilton from the NFL, came from the Texans there, and defense coordinator Ted Monachino. This whole roster, all the skill positions is all new or either transfer or just promoted, like Malik Washington at quarterback now. Jaleel Farouk comes in from Oklahoma, kind of like a degen at Oklahoma. And you have a Caleb Webb from Tennessee. I looked at Webb. He did not belong in Tennessee. All right. This ain't like, oh, I just got a transfer from Tennessee. He didn't look like he belonged at all. Nolan Ray at running back. DeJuan Williams running back transferring in. Yeah, I mean, 4-8 last year, 4-8 against the spread. Their schedule is very manageable because they only get Michigan out of the Big Four, but they do not get Purdue and Northwestern. At UCLA and at Wisconsin doesn't help either because you'd rather get those teams at home to mark up those wins. I could not believe that they had 6 draft picks in the NFL. I'm like, I had to smack my face when I saw that. I'm like, how did they get 6 draft picks? I guess, they're just kind of a team that just gets some talent, but being able to only put 4 wins up when you're, putting guys into the NFL the last few years like they have, how is like Mike Loxley still there? I guess they just can't get anybody else, and that's the only thing I can think of. My number's 4 right on the number. I mean, pretty close to the number anyway.
Yeah, even a bigger question, how did they beat UConn 50-7 last year to open the season with what that UConn team ended up doing? It's just staggering to see how this team started strong and faded.
Lied to us, man. They lied to us.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't see it here with Maryland. I will say that the schedule does call for there are a couple of favorable spots where they get some teams that are traveling in on long road trips. Washington comes in, Nebraska comes in, they get Indiana on homecoming. But I just think this bunch and what this group brings back, I think is just kind of fool's gold here. I don't see how this team really has a lot of offensive success. I don't see this team making a bowl game. They're starting a freshman quarterback Malik Washington, who they really like, but I just don't know necessarily if this is going to be the guy to just jump right in, plug and play, and just replace the offensive production from Billy Edwards last season. Kind of like what you had mentioned, some of these transfers, they're just maybe grasping at straws. Yeah, they're power forward transfers, but I just think some of these people just necessarily don't belong. Again, it's just kind of one of those things where they're really going to have to step up the play in the trenches when they're playing up against this tougher competition, and it's something they have not been able to do in recent years. So I think this is just another. We won't spend a lot of time on Maryland, but I think this is just another one where they might start hot again because the non-conference is as such to where they should be 3-0 when they go to Wisconsin. But after that, I think the wheels could fall off here in Maryland.
All right, well, let's get past Maryland, and Bobby's like, a case for the ages, case day. September Maryland versus November Maryland. Yeah, it's like how do you blow them out so big in September? I agree. Let's move on to a team we shouldn't even have to mention because they are not worthy, my friend. You are not worthy like Wayne's World. Purdue. Oh my God. I had them finished minus 12.25 points worse than the average team, which is worse than a lot of teams in the worst conferences out there. Dude, I don't even know if I was low enough on them. I mean, I've never seen a team this bad in the Big Ten. I never have. I mean, because it's not even like their schedule was that hard. But now Barry Odom comes in from UNLV, brings a decent amount of people, but it's not enough. I guess Nitro Tuggy from Georgia, wide receiver, but yeah, he wasn't going to start at Georgia. Charles Ross from USC comes in. Malachi Thomas, running back from Virginia Tech, comes in. I mean, he's going to try to put some pieces together, but man, it's going to take a lot longer. This team was 130. Okay, their highest EPA was 115th in opponent rush EPA. Dude, 118th, 115th, 132, and 127th. I just can't imagine how this team was so bad, and they didn't lose anybody. But dude, I looked at their schedule. I put WTF: Notre Dame, Michigan, Ohio State, Indiana, Washington. This is just not good for Purdue and the new coach Barry Odom. Josh.
It's really not. And the advanced metrics, when you look at the defensive rush metrics, the EPA per rush, the rush explosiveness allowed, the success on rush play rate has just been all just terrible. The offensive and defensive explosiveness were very bad. There's very little to draw from last year's team. I do like the running back, Devin Mockabee, I think is a running back that really runs with heart, and he runs with a lot of effort.
The only guy that comes back is Mockabee, really.
Yeah, but I honestly just feel like, I mean, this is kind of one of those, you give Barry Odom a free pass this year, no matter what the product on the field looks like. I'm not confident in the skill positions outside of Mockabee. I'm not super confident in the offensive line. And when you look at the advanced metrics, they don't like Purdue. When you look at the simple counting metrics, things like third down conversions and red zone success, this team had 18 red zone touchdowns on 34 attempts. They had 8 scoreless red zone possessions. The sack yardage allowed was just atrocious with 32 sacks given up. Way too many tackles for loss. They were just way behind the chains. The offensive continuity was just so terrible, which is why they only scored 16 points per game. And this season for Purdue, I think it's just going to be one where, I looked at the personnel and I looked at where this team should be power rated, and their week 1 opener, if they're struggling with Ball State, woof, this has 1-11 or 2-10 written all over it. I mean, just non-competitive football against USC, Notre Dame, Illinois, at Northwestern, they should not win. Michigan, Ohio State. And I will say this from a betting perspective, if you circle this spot November 15th at Washington, I don't know if there's a worse spot for any team in the country other than when Arkansas goes to Memphis. Purdue will have played Illinois, Minnesota, Northwestern, Rutgers, at Michigan, and then hosting Ohio State, and then they got to get on the airplane and go to Seattle. And that game, 7th game in 7 weeks against all those foes, and then they got to go to Seattle and compete there. Ain't going to happen. They won't be able to set that spread high enough. That's one I have circled in red ink.
If you're struggling against Ball State, man, I don't see a third win, and I'll give them Southern Illinois. But I mean, the only one that I could just think there's a chance is Rutgers on the 25th, and I just it's looking bad. Yeah, it's a situation where I'd rather go under, and you can go under plus two, under 2.5 wins at plus 150 right now. I didn't bet it, but it's a consideration. I'm sure their conference wins is probably 0.5 if you want to look at
Yeah,
conference.
or 1.0.
Yeah, something like that. But yeah, I don't see how you get to 2 wins. So I mean, I'd rather do that. You can give them Ball State and freaking Southern Illinois. I'll take under conference wins if it's one. Because you'd push at worst. I don't see 2 wins. So yeah,
Under 3.5, I think, is still minus 190, but that's almost as ironclad as it gets. I just don't see this team having a tremendous amount of success this season. They may not be as bad against the number, 7-17 the last 2 years against the spread, and just atrocious, really over the last 10 years, to be honest with you, in certain situations. But yeah, I don't see this team having it in the win column this season, and it's just going to be one of those transition years where they don't have the talent to compete all along the roster in the two deep at all three levels of the defense, in the skill room, along the offensive line. This is very, very likely the worst bunch of the Power Four.
Agreed. This is the worst out of everyone. Well, let's talk about a week 1 play that you might have made, or week 0. Do you have anything for the beginning of the football season to give us?
Yeah, specific to the Big Ten, I did lay 34.5 with Michigan. I think Michigan is going to have a real motivation to put up a big number against New Mexico. New Mexico, of course, was the darlings last year in the Mountain West, as their regular season win total opened up at 1.5, unbelievably, and that was over the posted win total, as that team was vying for bowl eligibility behind the electric play of Devon Dampier. They had a dynamic run game. Their offense was great. Their defense was terrible. With Dampier off to Utah, I believe this offense is going to play much slower. Jason Eck comes in from Idaho and brings a lot of Idaho talent with him. But the offense is just going to be very, very difficult to get anything going against this Michigan front seven. They are not going to. They gave up some sacks and some pressure plays, and Devon Dampier was able to wiggle out of trouble much more often than you may realize if you didn't watch a lot of New Mexico. But with who they have returning at quarterback, it's going to be negative plays galore. They're not going to be able to move the ball. I will really be shocked if this team scores more than 7 points. And I think defensively they were just as bad as ever, giving up 39 points to Air Force, giving up a ton of points to Utah State. It's going to be so bad that you can't set this spread high enough. Get it under 5 touchdowns, 34.5 with Michigan. And then, like I had mentioned earlier, I took Buffalo plus 18 when they go to Minnesota. Minnesota just has this prowess when they play MAC teams to play these lower scoring, close, competitive games. So I took Buffalo in week 1. How about you?
I mean, Western Michigan used to coach Western Michigan, so they always look at Fleck like that and say, "Hey, we want to beat them." Yeah, my number's 36 for the Michigan game, but it's a situation where it's not so much about the power ratings; it's just about the fact that New Mexico is not going to score, and even 36 agrees with your play. But man, it's just it's just like schematically, it's going to be a 3 at max maybe, and you should be getting in the 40s with Michigan just because all you got to do is show up type situation. So I get that. I hinted at the beginning, but I'm taking Southern Miss plus 13.5 at home. It's basically Marshall, right? It's last year's Marshall team playing the worst SEC team in the land. It's no longer Vanderbilt. It is Mississippi State. And Southern Miss gets them at home, which I find really interesting. I mean, this is going to be their Super Bowl right in the beginning of the year. I don't have it at 13.5. I think it should be shorter than that by a lot, actually. How are you going to upgrade Mississippi State that much and not upgrade Southern Miss? Southern Miss is my largest upgrade of any team from last year, just because of how bad they were. Yet it's literally Marshall's team and the best of what they had left, right? So it's just an interesting situation where I like them at home the very first week. There's a few other spots out there. I think if you're looking at Farmageddon right now for week 0, there's some 3.5s out there. Iowa State beat them last year. Did they get outgained a little bit because they were winning though? It was a situation where Kansas State just couldn't get them off the field, and Rocco Becht, threw all over them. And I don't know why it's 3.5. I know it's in Kansas City. It's at Arrowhead, right? But still, it's not like Iowa State's not going to travel to Kansas City. It's really close, dude. It's like you're going to get plenty of fans from them. I think 3.5 is a little bit too much.
That one's actually in Ireland.
Oh, is it in Ireland? Okay. Why did it say
Yeah,
Kansas
that's the
City?
Dublin game.
Okay.
I think that
I was
was Cincinnati and Nebraska is at Kansas City.
okay. Well, that's even better then because it's not in Kansas then. Okay, it's in Dublin. It's funny. I always forget that there's that one Dublin game, and that's what it was last year. We saw Navy versus it was 2 years ago. Navy versus Notre Dame was a great game in Dublin too. But yeah, even better. They're in Dublin, even more of a foreign field. And I think in Dublin, am I wrong to say that field's kind of banged up? So very low scoring, close game is what we could expect, Josh.
Yeah, and always a game where the weather can play a factor and there's sloppy field conditions in that soccer stadium. And it's just one of those games, too, where it's just going to be real interesting to see how that travel affects those teams, not only that week, but then also the following week with coming home. We saw it with Florida State where they lost to Georgia Tech and then they lose the very next week to Boston College. So certainly some strange travel there and just a real interesting game to kick off the season. It's a surprise that that's the one they picked for the Ireland game, but that'll be a real interesting watch. Going through the slate, I wouldn't be shocked to see South Florida compete with Boise. We've already talked a bunch this offseason about Boise and what they've lost and how bad that defense was at times in the Mountain West last season. Couldn't get off the field, couldn't stop the run or the pass at times. And South Florida is a team that has really showed up when playing up in competition. The last couple of seasons when they've played Alabama, those have been close competitive football games and certainly a much more competitive team at home. It's a long travel spot for Boise on the road on a Thursday night. I could grab some 9.5 of South Florida and settle in for one that might be just a touchdown bout either way.
Okay, well, there you go. It's funny. I am higher on South Florida than I thought I'd be after I looked at that conference too, and I was like, South Florida is kind of interesting, sitting here. And I think I wrote them down to go with you. Who was it? Navy? Did I write them down with? Yeah, UTSA is going to be tough. That's going to be interesting. Nebraska is playing in Kansas City. Yeah, so that's what it was. And I knew there was one game there, but even better that it's in Ireland. So interesting. What's that spread again for South Florida? Did you say it was 7.5?
It's 9.5 over at DK.
Okay, 9.5 on DK with home dog at 9.5. These first games really throw people off too. It's not like, they don't always live up. The away team definitely doesn't always live up to their power rating until later in the year. It's just that first weirdness to it. And yeah, I don't love laying chalk on the road. I did look at Alabama though against Florida State, and that's what I would consider laying some chalk with. But this is Alabama, and they need a big win after that embarrassing bowl game. That's got to be eating them all year. And Florida State's already kind of toast after a couple bad years here, in my opinion. So,
people may not realize how far that program fell last year, and they might just be automatically assuming a rebound there in Tallahassee, but it may not show up in this very first game of the season. And also not the smartest of ideas to provide some bulletin board material. Did you see what Thomas Castellanos had said about
he wasn't even that good of a quarterback at Boston College, man.
Well, and then he quits 5-6 games into the season, whatever it was, and just kind of flips the middle fingers at that group and then rolls out. But very surprising to hear him say what he said and give the Crimson Tide some bulletin board material unnecessarily. That could be the motivation they need to punch a couple in late and throw that middle finger back at him.
Just a quitter, dude. And he was 61% completion. It wasn't that great. 18 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. This ain't like, look at Bo Nix's numbers or anything. It's not like, you can completely put faith in this dude. I'm not sold on him. He was just weird, just thinking about the money. And yeah, man, I think this is going to be ugly. I think Alabama could really put one on him. So it's 12.5 and it's creeping up in some books. That's why I'm mentioning it, because I think it's going to get 13.5 for sure. So you can still find those 12.5 if you want to grab a little line value. But that's all I have. Josh, man, we've been talking an hour and 43 minutes, and it always feels like 43 minutes, man. It always feels like less than half the time, because I enjoy talking college football with you so much, and really appreciate all your insights. You did such a great job on this Big Ten preview, as you always do. Man, where can our listeners get your wonderful stuff all year long talking college football?
Well, I appreciate the kind words. I'll certainly be active on Twitter. I've been posting a lot of content this off season pertaining to the futures markets and also the regular season wins. And I'm over at the Action Network, so I'll be writing up 10 to 12 articles a week there. And then I'll also be featured on plenty of weekly podcasts pertaining to FCS content and also the Group of Five. We're going to really ratchet our content up in July, and so you'll want to tune in there. And I'll be on your program as well throughout the season. And you run a great show here. You've got plenty of great guests, and I'm proud and honored to be part of that. And I can't thank all of the listeners enough who have tuned in live and who jump in after recording to make this production what it is. So definitely appreciate that, and I'll certainly be back on here again.
Absolutely. And Josh and I are working up something kind of special for you for the college football season. Don't want to say anything just yet, but we're whipping some up. I think that's going to be some fun that you guys can have with us, and it could be a Friday thing. We'll talk about it later. But once again, make sure if you haven't already, check out at Step on a Duck 1 for Josh Nunn and his wonderful content. We'll be talking soon, Josh.
Have a good night. See you later.